When life turns upside down and the person you trust most disappears with everything you've worked for, what would you do? Watch as a mother and her brilliant 10-year-old son navigate betrayal, danger, and deceit, and discover the courage it takes to reclaim their life. This is not just a story of loss, it's a story of unstoppable love, resilience, and justice served in the most unexpected way. The hum of the city felt distant as Hannah sat on the edge of her small, sunlit kitchen, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of cold coffee. The scent of stale beans mingled with the faint smell of paint from the camper van brochures she had left scattered across the table, remnants of a plan now shattered. Her phone buzzed again, the screen flashing a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk." "It's about Greg." Her stomach twisted, a knot tightening as she realized whatever awaited her was no longer just words on a screen. The light through the window hit her face, sharp and unyielding, mirroring the sudden clarity that cut through the haze of her exhaustion. She had been abandoned. Alone. With Ryan, her 10-year-old son, whose presence was both anchor and reminder that her world had to keep turning, even when the ground beneath her felt like quicksand. Ryan entered quietly, his small sneakers squeaking against the wooden floor. He held a notebook close to his chest, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity, as if he had already sensed the storm brewing around them. "Mom," he said softly, "are we okay?" His words weren't accusatory, they were tentative, probing the space between her despair and his need for reassurance. Hannah swallowed hard, forcing a smile, though her lips trembled. "We'll be okay, Ryan. I promise." But some things have changed. She didn't need to elaborate. The look in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, conveyed the gravity of what she couldn't yet say aloud. The sun moved across the kitchen walls, throwing shadows over the photographs of their family, moments frozen in happier times. Miles captured in frames that now seemed almost like lies. Greg, her husband, the man who had promised partnership, had vanished with the van, leaving her with a debt she hadn't asked for and a betrayal she could not digest. Hannah's mind raced, jumping from the camper van's glossy brochure to the drained bank account, to the emails she had ignored for too long, and finally to the gnawing fear that perhaps nothing in her life was as stable as she had believed. Ryan, sensing her faltering, approached and sat on the floor, drawing tiny sketches of mountains and rivers, the very landscapes they had planned to explore in the camper van. "We could still go," he whispered. "We just need a new plan." The innocence in his voice was like a spark in the darkness, and Hannah realized that despite the weight pressing on her chest, she couldn't break, not for him, not for herself. The room, filled with sunlight and quiet desperation, became a stage of resilience, a mother and son against an uncertain world, bound by love and sheer determination. A soft chime came from her laptop, an email subject line glinting in the morning light. "Loan reminder, immediate action required." Her heart sank as she stared at the numbers. Panic clawed at her chest, but then Ryan's hand brushed hers, warm and small. "Mom, we'll figure it out," he said simply. His faith in her, unwavering, anchored her. She exhaled slowly, letting the storm inside her settle just enough to think. Hannah stood, placing the mug down with deliberate care. The kitchen no longer felt like a cage, it felt like a command center. She would face this, navigate every deception, every obstacle, and come out on the other side. And with Ryan at her side, already planning and observing with a precocious mind far beyond his years, she felt the first flicker of hope in what had seemed an endless night. The world outside was ruthless, unpredictable, and unkind, but inside that small apartment, a quiet revolution had begun. And it started with two hearts refusing to be broken. The next morning, the apartment felt smaller somehow, shadows stretching across walls that had witnessed laughter now echoing only with quiet tension. Hannah sat cross-legged on the couch, laptop open, eyes scanning every transaction, every email from the bank, each one a silent reminder of Greg's betrayal. The numbers blurred, yet the reality was unmistakable. $35,000 owed, a camper van gone, a husband vanished, and a future suddenly uncertain. Ryan appeared beside her, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes sharp and calculating despite his 10 years. "Mom," he said, tapping the laptop screen, "if Dad thought he could hide, he forgot about me." Hannah looked up, startled by his resolve, a mix of awe and worry settling in her chest. Ryan had always been perceptive, but now he seemed almost preternaturally alert, scanning the accounts, recalling conversations, cataloging patterns, as if the child before her had become a strategist overnight. She could feel the weight of both their lives pressing in, hers from exhaustion, betrayal, and illness, his from a precocious understanding no child should carry, but instead of despair, there was a quiet electricity. A sense that together they might bend the chaos to their will. As she stood to make coffee, she noticed the camper van brochure tucked under the table, its edges curling, its glossy image of freedom now mocking. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself not to cry, and instead called the finance company, her voice steady though every word carried the tremor of underlying panic. "Yes, I understand," she said, "but I need to know my options if the vehicle is no longer in my possession." Each response she received felt like a blade twisting deeper. Repossession, default, legal consequences, her name alone tied to debts she hadn't authorized, choices she hadn't made. Ryan, watching quietly, suddenly spoke up with a suggestion so precise it startled her. "Mom, what if we track him? Remember the GPS app on my phone? We can see him. We can plan." Hannah paused, realizing he had been observing, thinking, preparing even while she had been hospitalized, the boy quietly collecting every clue, every detail of Greg's movements. The thought of spying on her husband filled her with unease and determination in equal measure, but the fire ignited within her. This was no longer about money alone. It was about reclaiming their lives, restoring a sense of agency, and showing Ryan that betrayal could be met with courage. Hours stretched into evening, the apartment alive with silent strategizing. They drew maps on scrap paper, noted possible routes, reviewed bank statements, and quietly rehearsed scenarios, their voices low but purposeful. Ryan, usually quiet and reflective, spoke in decisive tones, outlining contingencies Hannah hadn't considered, anticipating excuses, planning confrontations, turning the living room into a command center for justice. Yet beneath the meticulous plotting, there lingered fear of confrontation, of legal complications, of the unknown temperament of a man who had already shown he could vanish without remorse. Hannah's mind flickered back to her hospital bed, the Ford drip, the sterile ceiling, the helplessness she had felt, yet now, with Ryan's hand brushing hers, with his brilliance guiding her, she felt a surge of resilience that made her pulse thrum like a drumbeat of war. Outside, the city lights began to flicker on, indifferent to the quiet revolution happening within her walls, and as she looked down at Ryan, drawing imaginary lines on the floor, Hannah understood something profound. This was no longer just survival. This was a reclamation. They would find Greg, confront the betrayal, and, somehow, carve a path forward that neither despair nor deceit could destroy. The tension coiled around them like a living thing, both suffocating and energizing, and in that charged stillness, mother and son knew the first moves had been made, the game set in motion, and there was no turning back. Late that night, the apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside, yet inside, the air felt electric, heavy with anticipation and dread. Hannah sat hunched over the laptop, eyes flicking between the GPS map and the flashing notifications of Greg's movements, each ping like a pulse of betrayal reminding her how fragile their lives had become. Ryan crouched beside her, his small fingers tracing the routes on the screen as though he could rewrite reality with a touch. Suddenly, the GPS pinged with an unfamiliar location. Greg had stopped at a remote warehouse on the outskirts of town, far from the cafes and shops he normally frequented. Hannah's heart lurched. A storm of fear, anger, and resolve collided inside her chest. She glanced at Ryan, who met her gaze with unwavering certainty, his youthful face lined with an intelligence that felt almost surreal. "Mom, "We can't wait any longer," he said softly, but with the force of command. "If we don't act now, he'll disappear again, and the van and our money will be gone for good." Hannah's hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the enormity of the decision looming before her. Confront a man who had shattered her trust, risk a volatile encounter, and navigate unknown dangers, all while protecting her son. She felt the familiar panic creeping in, a tide of helplessness she had fought so hard to suppress since the hospital, yet she swallowed it down, letting determination flood in instead. "You're right," she whispered, voice steadying as her gaze hardened. "We do this together. Whatever happens, we face it as one." Ryan nodded, and for the first time, Hannah felt a surge of empowerment that eclipsed the fear, a mother and child united in strategy and courage, poised to reclaim what had been stolen. As they grabbed jackets and the spare car keys, the apartment seemed to pulse with their intent, the walls closing and yet propelling them forward. Every shadow along the dim streets as they drove toward the warehouse seemed to echo past betrayals, yet each step they took drew them closer to confrontation, to revelation, to the moment where Hannah's fury and Ryan's cleverness would collide with Greg's recklessness. The tension was unbearable, the stakes impossibly high, but in that charged stillness, Hannah felt a strange clarity. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and nothing, not fear, not doubt, not exhaustion, could hold her back. The warehouse loomed ahead like a dark monument, its jagged silhouette cutting sharply into the twilight sky, and as Hannah parked the car a block away, she felt the weight of every misstep, every betrayal settle on her shoulders, a gravity that pressed her down even as adrenaline spiked through her veins. Ryan, sitting upright beside her, whispered, "Mom, he's inside. I can see the van through the broken windows." His voice was steady, almost unnervingly calm for a 10-year-old, but Hannah could see the tension coiled in his small hands, the way his jaw tightened, the subtle tremor in his shoulders. Every instinct screamed caution. This was Greg, unpredictable and volatile, and his mistress might be there too. Hannah's mind raced. What if he panicked? What if he lashed out? The van, the money, the life they had tried to build, it all hung on this moment. She took a deep breath, swallowing the fear like a bitter pill, and reached over, squeezing Ryan's hand. "We stay together. We stay smart. One step at a time," she whispered. Ryan nodded, and with that, they approached the warehouse, the crunch of gravel underfoot sounding impossibly loud in the silence. Inside, shadows shifted. A flicker of light from a single hanging bulb revealed Greg arguing with his mistress, voices rising and falling like jagged waves. Hannah froze, heart hammering, and in that suspended heartbeat, the enormity of her anger, grief, and betrayal flooded her. The man she had shared her life with, the father of her child, had abandoned them for another, squandering their savings, destroying trust. Yet amidst the fury, a strange calm settled over her. The hospital bed, the tears, the sleepless nights, they had all led to this point. Ryan tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, we have to speak first. Let him know we know everything." Hannah exhaled sharply, and together they stepped into the light, the echo of their presence cutting through the warehouse like a blade. Greg spun around, eyes widening, mouth opening, then closing. For the first time, he looked truly vulnerable. "Hannah, what are you doing here?" he stammered. His mistress stiffened beside him, her smugness faltering as she noticed the boy, standing tall, his gaze sharp, fearless. "We're here for the van," Hannah said, voice steady but carrying every ounce of the pain, betrayal, and fury she had bottled up. "And the money you stole from us. It's over, Greg. You've made your choices, now face the consequences." Ryan stepped forward, small but formidable, eyes locking onto his father's, the clarity in his tone slicing through the tension. "Why did you leave us? Why betray Mom and me for her?" Greg faltered, searching for a word, an excuse, anything, but the weight of truth pressed down harder than any defense he could muster. Hannah felt the room tighten, the air thick with anticipation. Every heartbeat, every shift of shadow, every quiver of voice became amplified, cinematic in its intensity, as the confrontation she had feared yet prepared for unfolded. Time seemed suspended as mother and son, united in courage and strategy, faced the man who had upended their world, each word, each glance laden with stakes far beyond a simple argument, their family, their future, their dignity all hanging in the balance. Every moment charged with the promise that nothing would ever be the same after this night. The warehouse seemed to shrink around them, every shadow a witness, every echo amplifying the tension. As Hannah stepped forward, Ryan at her side, and the air became electric with anticipation, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every breath deliberate. Greg stumbled back, his composure shattered, his mistress clutching his arm like a lifeline that wasn't there, while Hannah's eyes burned with a quiet, controlled fury, the culmination of sleepless nights, betrayal, financial ruin, and hospital-bound despair distilled into this single, unflinching confrontation. "Give me the keys." Hannah's voice cut through the silence, crisp, unyielding, the authority in it echoing beyond her years of fear and doubt. Greg froze, his gaze darting between the van and the child standing unflinchingly beside her, the very embodiment of innocence sharpened into resolve. "Mom, we deserve the truth," Ryan said, his voice calm but piercing, each word deliberate, as if the weight of his 10 years had been forged in the furnace of loss and resilience. "Why did you leave us? Why betray everything we had for her?" For the first time, Greg's bravado crumbled, and the facade of the charming, careless man evaporated, leaving a vulnerable, fumbling figure who realized the magnitude of his recklessness. Mandy tried to interject, her voice brittle, eyes darting nervously as she realized the tables had turned, that she was no longer an accessory to seduction, but a witness to accountability. Hannah didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her hand outstretched, the light from the warehouse bulb glinting on her determined face. "Everything we worked for, our money, our home, our dignity, you gambled away. And now you face the consequences." The sound of her words reverberated, mingling with the distant hum of the city, the faint rustle of leaves outside, a soundtrack to the revelation. Ryan, sensing the moment, pulled up the GPS app on his small phone, showing every movement of the van, every detour, every lie that Greg had tried to disguise. It was visual proof of deceit, irrefutable, and Greg's eyes widened with the slow, horrifying recognition of his exposure. Silence fell for a heartbeat, then Hannah added, "And the money you withdrew from our account, $20,000, is coming back. You'll pay it every month for Ryan's future." Greg opened his mouth, searching for excuses, apologies, anything to regain control, but Ryan interrupted sharply, "No more lies. Face what you did. You abandoned us, you betrayed us, and now you fix it." The weight of truth and justice hung in the air like a storm. Mandy's face paled as she realized her complicity, the reality crashing down, and suddenly, the distant wail of sirens grew louder, the police arriving on cue, called earlier by Hannah in advance, their presence sealing the accountability Greg could no longer evade. Greg's shoulders slumped, the pretense of power stripped away, and for a fleeting moment, Hannah felt a surge of relief, triumph, and catharsis, the culmination of fear, pain, and strategic patience converging in one undeniable, unshakable victory. She glanced at Ryan, his small hand gripping hers, and in his steady gaze she saw affirmation. They had faced the storm together, unbroken, and while the road ahead still demanded courage and rebuilding, this moment, the reclaiming of what was theirs, the confrontation of betrayal, the assertion of truth, was theirs entirely. And as the flashing red and blue lights bathed the warehouse, casting long shadows across determined faces and humbled hearts, Hannah understood, deeply, that the story of loss had transformed into a story of strength, and no force, no betrayal, no deceit, could erase the resilience she and Ryan had forged from the ashes. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains of their small, tidy apartment, painting golden streaks across the worn wooden floor where Hannah and Ryan sat side by side. At the breakfast table, the air still heavy with the echoes of the confrontation that had changed everything, The camper van was returned, the stolen money accounted for, and the legal processes set in motion. Yet the quiet between them was not the absence of sound, but the presence of reflection, of wounds beginning to heal and lessons etched deeply into memory. Hannah watched Ryan sip his milk, the way his small hands held the cup with a steadiness that belied his 10 years, and she felt a swell of pride so sharp it almost hurt, the kind that comes not from achievement but from survival. From the act of carrying on when the world seemed intent on breaking you. She thought of the nights she had lain in the hospital bed, the Ford drip humming beside her, the sterile scent of antiseptic mingling with fear and despair, and how each time she had glanced at Ryan's determined face, she had drawn strength from his unexpected wisdom, his quiet insistence that life could still be navigated, even when betrayal left it jagged and raw. Now, as she poured cereal into a bowl and Ryan hummed a tune from a video game they had promised to play later, she realized that their world had shifted, not just in circumstances, but in the foundation of trust and courage they had rebuilt together. The absence of Greg was no longer a shadow looming over them. It was a blank space filled with potential, a canvas on which they could paint a life defined not by fear or deceit, but by choice and resilience. Outside, the city stirred awake, indifferent to the personal storms that had raged in a forest park, in hospital corridors, and inside a living room where a mother and son had silently made a pact to face whatever came next with unflinching resolve. Hannah's phone buzzed, a gentle reminder of work, of responsibilities, of the normalcy she had once taken for granted, and she smiled, a quiet, self-contained joy that carried the weight of everything she had endured, every sleepless night, every tear shed in isolation, every anxious heartbeat while imagining her son's future. "Mom," Ryan said suddenly, looking up with a mischievous glint in his eyes, "do you think we could take the camper van on a small trip this weekend? Just the two of us." Hannah laughed softly, the sound a release of tension, a delicate melody in the otherwise ordinary morning, and she nodded, her heart swelling with an unexpected lightness, the promise of adventure now intertwined with lessons of vigilance, courage, and love. They moved through their day with quiet determination, unpacking groceries, planning meals, and laughing over minor mishaps, each act a testament to the strength that emerges when life forces you to rise above despair. As night fell, and the apartment glowed warmly against the backdrop of the sleeping city, Hannah tucked Ryan into bed, tracing a hand along his hair, whispering words she hadn't realized she needed to say aloud. "We survived, my love. And together, we can face anything." Ryan smiled sleepily, murmuring, "I know, Mom. We're unstoppable." Hannah sat by the window afterward, looking out at the twinkling lights, thinking of Greg, of Mandy, of the chaos they had wrought, and she felt neither anger nor vengeance now, only clarity and resolve. The past had been violent, unfair, and relentless, but the present, fragile yet radiant, was theirs to claim. And in that quiet, cinematic stillness, she understood that life's deepest victories are not always loud or celebrated. They are the small, defiant acts of survival, the reclamation of peace after betrayal, the unspoken promise to move forward. Stronger, wiser, unbroken, as mother and child, hand in hand, ready for the horizon. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit like to show your support, subscribe for more cinematic tales of courage and heart, and comment below, what would you do if faced with betrayal like Hannah's? We want to hear your thoughts.